what if the reason you are completely exhausted at the end of the day isn't because you did too much, but because your brain was forced to do like far too little?
Right. It's a completely different way to think about it.
It really is. I mean, think about that for a second. We
Mm.
operate in this culture that is just obsessed with burnout, right? With the sheer volume of tasks we have to juggle.
Yeah, exactly. The hustle culture.
Right. But the incredibly thought-provoking notes you sent us for today's deep dive, well, they flip that entire narrative completely on its head. So welcome to the show.
Glad to be diving into this one. It's really fascinating.
It is. Today, our mission is to explore a fascinating two-pronged framework you highlighted in your research. One that tries to decode why modern life often feels like trying to run advanced software on obsolete hardware.
That's a great way to phrase it. It's such a compelling way to look at the modern human condition because your notes break this down into two very distinct lenses.
Right.
First, there's the external reality, which your sources categorize as the system versus the individual.
The outside forces.
Exactly. And second, there's the internal reality, the psychological fallout, which is termed the inner landscape.
Yeah.
What we are really examining here is a profound structural friction between the highly adaptable, nuanced human brain and the rigid, standardized institutions we have to interact with daily.
Mm.
Specifically schools, the labor market, and the healthcare system.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp what's happening in our own heads, that inner landscape you mentioned,
Right.
we have to map out the external environment first. We have to look at the architecture of these systems. But I actually want to push back on the premise right out of the gate.
Oh, sure. Good.
Your notes suggest these systems are fundamentally mismatched to human needs because they lack the tools to handle individual variance. But isn't standardization kind of the entire point of a system?
Well, yes and no.
Like, if I'm designing a national healthcare grid or a public school network, I have to rely on standardization to achieve scale. I can't just build a bespoke hospital for every single patient, right?
It's an efficiency thing.
Right. It's like these institutions only have a hammer, so they treat every individual like a nail, even if the person is a screw.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you're absolutely right that scale requires a degree of standardization. And from an engineering standpoint, that's incredibly efficient.
Exactly.
But the sources you provided aren't arguing that systems shouldn't scale. They are pointing out the hidden destructive cost of what happens when biological organisms are forced through an industrial sorting machine.
Wow, an industrial sorting machine. That's a vivid image.
It really is. Let's look at the healthcare example from your notes. Modern medicine is heavily algorithmic.
Right. Algorithms everywhere.
You present with a symptom. That symptom is translated into an ICD-10 billing code, and that code dictates a standardized treatment protocol.
Which, sounds logical on paper. It prevents errors and ensures a baseline of care, doesn't it?
It does. But what happens when your particular biology or, your specific combination of environmental stressors doesn't neatly map onto that algorithm?
You just fall through the cracks.
Exactly. The system doesn't have a mechanism to say, hey, this is a complex, multivariable human being. It basically just says, you don't fit the diagnostic criteria for X, so you must be fine. Or it forces you into the closest available diagnostic box.
Yikes. So you're squeezed into a category that doesn't really fit.
Right. The mechanism of the system relies on statistical averages. But the average human doesn't actually exist in nature. It's a mathematical abstraction.
Huh.
So the individual is continuously reduced and, compressed to fit the available tools.
That makes a lot of sense. The institution relies on the hammer of standard protocol. And if you happen to be a screw, the system doesn't just fail to drive you in properly.
No, it causes damage.
Yeah, the repeated impact of that hammer actively strips your threads. It bends you out of shape. Which leads perfectly into how this friction actually starts, because your notes make it clear this isn't just an adult problem.
Oh, definitely not.
We don't just wake up at 30 and suddenly feel this institutional mismatch. We are trained for it from childhood, specifically through the public education system.
Yeah, the modern classroom is really our first sustained encounter with that institutional hammer. The historical context here is vital, honestly.
Industrial Revolution stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. The foundational structure of public education, the bells, the segmented subjects, the age-based cohorts, was heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution.
To make factory workers.
Right. The goal was to produce a compliant workforce that could sit still for 8 hours, follow standardized instructions, and tolerate repetitive tasks.
Wow. Right, so the system was designed to optimize for compliance and basic competency, not to, maximize individual intellectual velocity.
Precisely.
And there was a specific section in your notes that really stood out to me here regarding the lack of challenges. When we typically discuss kids struggling in school, the entire narrative focuses on them falling behind.
Yes, always.
We think about learning disabilities, lack of resources, or material that is just too fast-paced. But your research highlights the exact opposite end of the spectrum, the psychological damage of being perpetually understimulated.
Which is a massive blind spot in how we evaluate systemic failure.
Totally.
We understand the mechanism of falling behind, but we rarely discuss the neurobiology of being underwhelmed. The human brain is an adaptation machine. It thrives on a mechanism called reward prediction error.
Reward prediction error, what is that?
Basically, when a child encounters a novel, difficult problem and finally solves it, the brain releases a surge of dopamine.
Oh, okay. The feel-good chemical.
Right. And that dopamine drives neuroplasticity. It physically builds new neural pathways. It's literally how we grow.
But if a kid already knows the answer to the math worksheet before they even pick up the pencil, there is no novelty, there is no struggle, and therefore no dopamine release.
Exactly. The brain literally registers the environment as biologically useless.
Wow. Biologically useless?
Yeah. But because the school system only has that one standardized hammer, it aims for the middle. It lacks the institutional tools to identify a student who has mastered the material and seamlessly pivot them to a higher level of complexity.
Because that would require a different tool.
Right. Instead, what happens?
They are told to sit quietly and wait for the other 29 kids to finish.
Yep.
This is what blew my mind when I was reading through your notes. We culturally view a kid who finds school too easy as having caught a lucky break.
Oh, absolutely.
We think, oh, good for you, enjoy the free time. But in reality, they're being punished with enforced inactivity for being efficient.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
They learn that their full cognitive capacity isn't just unnecessary. Expressing it is actually disruptive to the smooth operation of the system.
And that is the root of the trauma right there. The child learns to suppress their own engagement just to maintain the peace.
That's so sad.
It is. Think about it like a muscle. If a muscle isn't working against resistance, it doesn't just stay the same size. It actively atrophies.
Right. Use it or lose it.
Exactly. The same applies to cognitive drive. When the institution lacks the tool to provide resistance, it inadvertently trains the student in apathy. It teaches them to disconnect their effort from their environment.
Which is a horrifying realization when you consider what comes next. Because if you spend 12 to 16 years being systemically trained to suppress your capacity and tolerate understimulation,
You're ready for the office.
you are perfectly primed for the labor market. Exactly. This brings us to one of the most compelling concepts in your research, the phenomenon of Boreout. Not burnout, but Boreout.
What's fascinating here is the symmetry between the two concepts, even though they're driven by opposite mechanisms.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, burnout is well documented. It's a crisis of overexertion, usually driven by external demands, wildly exceeding an individual's internal resources. Your sympathetic nervous system is trapped in a state of chronic fight or flight until you just collapse.
Right, everyone knows that feeling.
But Boreout is a crisis of underutilization. It's what happens when the workplace fundamentally lacks the tools to engage the actual bandwidth of the worker.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though. I can imagine someone listening to this, maybe someone working a grueling, physically demanding job, thinking, bore out. Really? Being bored at your email job is a crisis now.
I get that.
It sounds a bit like modern white-collar entitlement. Is it actually that severe, or are we just pathologizing the fact that work is sometimes boring?
It is absolutely that severe, and the evolutionary biology explains why. Boredom isn't just a mild inconvenience. It is an evolutionary alarm bell.
An alarm bell?
Yes. Just as physical pain is a signal to pull your hand away from a hot stove, boredom is a psychological signal that your current environment is not yielding any meaningful return on your time or energy.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary prompt to change your environment, to go hunt somewhere else, to innovate.
But in a rigid corporate structure, you can't just change your environment. You are physically or digitally tethered to that desk for 8 hours a day, regardless of whether your tasks take 2 hours or 10.
Precisely. You have the alarm bell ringing continuously, telling you to seek meaning and challenge, but the system denies you the agency to act on it.
So you're just stuck.
You are trapped in a state of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And neurologically, being trapped triggers the exact same stress response as being overworked.
Wait, really? The exact same.
Yes, your cortisol levels rise. You experience chronic systemic stress, not from doing too much, but from the acute, daily realization that your potential is being actively wasted. It's not entitlement. It's the psychological equivalent of solitary confinement for your intellect.
That reframes it entirely. It's like running a high-performance engine constantly on idle.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you leave a sports car idling in the driveway for months, it doesn't stay pristine. The battery drains, the fluids get gunked up, the spark plugs foul. The lack of use actively destroys the machinery.
Exactly.
You have millions of adults sitting in cubicles or on endless virtual meetings, fully aware they have a massive untapped bandwidth, but the system's KPIs and rigid job descriptions simply don't have a port to plug that bandwidth into.
And the tragic irony is that the workplace loses out on incredible innovation because it only values predictable compliance.
Yeah, don't rock the boat.
Right? The system demands a specific gear turning at a specific speed. If you can turn faster, or if you can invent a better machine altogether, you become a threat to the standardization.
So what does this all mean? We've traced this external friction, this system versus the individual, from the standardized algorithms of healthcare, through the enforced apathy of the classroom, straight into the idling engine of the workplace.
Yeah, it's quite a journey.
This is where your notes make that crucial pivot, because all of this systemic friction doesn't just evaporate, it lands somewhere.
It has to go somewhere.
It lands right in the inner landscape.
This is where we shift our focus to the internal psychological reality. The inner landscape is the repository for all of this external friction.
It's where we feel it.
Exactly. It's where the human being has to process, internalize, and somehow make sense of a world that constantly demands they shrink themselves to fit the available slots.
And when we look at the inner landscape, the data on modern mental health is staggering.
Oh, it's unprecedented.
We are seeing levels of generalized anxiety, low-level chronic depression, and this pervasive ambient sense of meaningless that are just off the charts. But what your notes point out is how we traditionally treat this.
Yeah, the medicalization.
When someone feels that profound sense of being stuck or unfulfilled, the default societal response is to medicalize it. We look at the individual and say, your brain chemistry must be off. Here is a pill, or here is a cognitive behavioral therapy worksheet to help you reframe your thoughts.
Which is the ultimate systemic gaslighting.
Gaslighting, that's a strong word, but yeah, it fits.
It really is. We have a powerful societal tendency to pathologize what is actually a completely rational biological reaction to an abnormal environment.
Right.
Think about it this way. If you take a plant that thrives in full sunlight and you lock it in a dark closet, and its leaves start to wilt and turn brown.
Right. You don't blame the plant.
Exactly. You don't diagnose the plant with a wilting syndrome. You don't genetically modify the plant to tolerate the dark. You recognize that the environment is fundamentally mismatched to the organism's needs. You move it to the sun.
We don't do that with human beings. When a person wilts under the crushing weight of Boreout, or a child acts out because their brain is starving for a dopamine-releasing challenge, we diagnose the individual. We internalize the blame.
Always.
I think about how many people look in the mirror every day and think, you know, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy with this secure, well-paying job? Why couldn't I just focus and be a quote-unquote good student?
And that internalization causes an immense amount of secondary psychological damage. You aren't just suffering from the friction, you are suffering from the guilt of feeling the friction.
Wow.
What the system versus individual framework provides is a profound mechanism for externalizing that blame. It allows you to step back and realize that if you are a screw being repeatedly hit by a hammer, the resulting damage isn't because you are a defective screw. It's because the institution only handed out hammers.
When you highlighted this in your notes, it completely changed how I viewed my own history with these institutions. It is incredibly validating.
It takes the weight off.
It really does. It removes the moral failing from the equation. It tells you that your anxiety or your apathy might not be a personal defect at all. It might just be the friction of your inherent complexity grinding against a system built for simplicity.
It fundamentally shifts the paradigm of self-improvement.
How so?
Instead of constantly trying to fix your inner landscape to better tolerate a rigid external system, the goal becomes finding or creating microenvironments where your specific variance is actually an asset, not a liability.
Oh, I love that.
It's about seeking out the environments that require your full capacity rather than those that punish you for it.
To summarize the journey you've taken us on today, navigating modern life is not simply a matter of managing your internal psychology in a vacuum. It requires a clear-eyed understanding of the ongoing structural conflict between the system and the individual. We've explored how the overarching architecture of our society, the algorithmic reduction in healthcare, the enforced understimulation in public schools, and the agonizing idling engine of Boreout in the labor market is built on a foundation of standardization that frequently lacks the tools to process human nuance.
And we've seen how that continuous external friction inevitably shapes the inner landscape, creating a profound cognitive dissonance where we mistakenly internalize systemic inadequacies as personal, medicalized flaws.
It is a heavy realization, but an incredibly empowering one. It gives us permission to stop blaming ourselves for not fitting into boxes we were never biologically designed to fit into in the first place.
Well said.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, what is a final provocative thought we can leave the listener with? Something to really mull over as they look at the institutions around them tomorrow.
I would pose this. If our overarching institutions, from the classroom where our minds are molded to the cubicle where our prime years are spent, are systematically designed in a way that inherently suppresses our drive and leads to bore-out, we must fundamentally reevaluate our definition of the modern mental health crisis. How much of the psychological distress currently ravaging our inner landscape isn't actually a sickness that needs to be cured, but simply a profound, agonizingly untapped hunger for a genuine challenge?
A profound, untapped hunger for a genuine challenge. That changes everything. Maybe we aren't broken. Maybe we just haven't been given the right environment to truly test our limits and utilize all of our parts. Thank you so much for providing such incredibly well-researched, illuminating notes for us to explore today.
It was a pleasure.
It has been a truly paradigm-shifting conversation. Until the next deep dive, keep questioning the systems around you and never apologize for outgrowing the box.